Hello, and welcome everyone. I'm Dr. Eliane Validuro, the Global Hub Director for Future Earth in Canada and the Executive Director of Sustainability in the Digital Age. I want to take a moment to extend a very well welcome to you all and thank you for attending this session on the National Dialogue Series as part of a half-day symposium called Canada's Sustainable Future, Creating a Digital Action Plan. I would like to begin by acknowledging that I'm located on unceded Indigenous lands. The Kanien'kehá:ka Nation is recognized as the custodians of the lands and waters on which we gather today. Tiohtià:ke, Montreal is historically known as a gathering place for many First Nations. Today, it is home to a diverse population of Indigenous and other peoples. We respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples within the community. I'm also the moderator for today's symposium. In September and October this year, Future Earth, Sustainability in the Digital Age and the Canadian Science Policy Centre jointly hosted a series of online national dialogues looking at how digital innovations can help Canada achieve the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. This series is funded by the Government of Canada's Sustainable Development Goals funding program. I will share the key results in a few minutes. After the panel discussion, a half-hour commentary will follow. Dr. Joël Martin from the National Research Council of Canada and Olivier Bouillon from the Sustainable Development Goals Unit of Employment and Social Development Canada will comment on what is heard during the panel discussion. I hope you enjoyed today's event. So before we dive into today's discussion, I would like to ask our panelists to take a moment to introduce themselves. With you, Bonnie.
Great. There we are, off mute now. Well, thanks very, very much for the kind invitation to be here. Rather than launching into too many remarks yet, I will just literally introduce myself. And I'm Bonnie Schmidt. I'm president and founder of Let's Talk Science. We're a national education and outreach organization supporting early childhood to grade 12 education across Canada.
Thank you, Bonnie. Ryan Oliver.
Thank you. My name is Ryan Oliver. I am the Chief Executive Officer of the Pingwa Association, an organization that works to provide technology opportunities and digital skill building in rural, remote, and Indigenous communities.
Thank you for being here. Karen Becker.
Hello, really pleased to be at the session. Thanks so much, Eliane, for your warm welcome. I'm Dr. Karen Becker, a professor at the University of British Columbia, and I'm speaking to you from the unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish, and just wanted to acknowledge how apropos today's discussion is, given the terrible flooding and ongoing struggles we're having here in British Columbia. So very, very keen to dive into the discussion.
Thank you, Karen, for reminding us of the urgency of why our symposium today matters so much. Ken Paul. Okay. So what we'll do while we wait for Ken to join us is I just want to thank all of the panelists for being here. It's really a pleasure to have you with us today. So I'm just going to present some of the key results from the National Dialogue Series. For the National Dialogue Series, for Theme 1, key findings on how both digital skills and sustainability literacy can be raised in Canada, and what the suggested actions and solutions are. So first, there's a need to increase the access to broadband internet to bridge the digital divide in Canada, especially in the North, and COVID-19 pandemic highlighted the importance of this issue. We also need to improve education and lifelong training to respond to the demand for general and specialized digital and sustainability skills. And within this, reconnecting with nature, we see as a critical step to ensure all value working towards a sustainable planet for all. And third, we also noted the importance of leveraging the arts to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals and seeing this as very critical to scaling literacy on the Sustainable Development Goals and nudging the needed behavioral change to live within planetary boundaries. For Theme 2, on enhancing cross-sectoral partnership for sustainable innovation, and what we identified were the need for more financing and investment to really be increased to ensure as well that we reduce barriers to investment in and adoption of digital technologies in all sectors and at all levels of government. There was a lot of discussion around leadership and what is needed in terms of the types of leadership to enable digital transformation, what was needed in terms of defining leadership differently to be more participative, shared, inclusive, distributive, flatter models of leadership rather than perpetuating a traditional top-down approach. This also included leveraging followership, recognizing when you don't need to lead because there's someone else in the community you should defer to was also critical. How do we differentiate those moments? And it was also noted the importance of cultivating culture and strategy equally to work and to use in terms of creating the needed framework for sustainable development goals as a framework to move forward. And the need for coherence and knowledge that is more cohesive, more integrated and interoperable. And so what was noted was that uncoordinated ways of knowledge sharing reinforcing existing silos and lead to duplication. And so we noted the need that we needed data to stop being fragmented and start benefiting all stakeholders, whether it's open data or other types of data, but how do we ensure that whatever the ownership is, that benefits can accrue to all? And for theme 3, the findings around Indigenous science and knowledge driving transformative solutions, what we noted was that for Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples to work collectively in ways that benefit all communities, there needs to be collective understanding. This can be achieved through transformations through the education systems at all levels, ensuring that Indigenous stories, histories, science, and languages are taught alongside Western approaches, and embedding the two knowledge systems within curriculums. So what we noted was two-eyed seeing can become a standard research practice, and that this would help to bridge current divides between Indigenous science and Western science frameworks. We also must recognize Indigenous data sovereignty and follow the UNESCO recommendations on open science and the decolonization of knowledge. As well, Indigenous communities need equitable access to high-speed internet connectivity and to digital tools such as geographic data systems, drones, imagery, so they can build and manage vital digital data systems on their lands and waters. So now let's dive into our discussion. So each panelist will have about 6 to 7 minutes for each question. I'm going to start with Bonnie and Ryan. So the question to you are, speakers for the National Dialogue Series emphasize the critical need to engage citizens in a digital action plan for Canada's sustainable future. From your perspective, what would you suggest to foster citizen engagement and to ensure sustainability for the next generations? How could digital innovation speed up this process? And are there any particular groups of citizens you are focusing your engagement on that we in turn should focus our engagement on? Bonnie?
Thanks so much. That's a pretty robust question. And I think before I dive into it, I just want to give a little bit of context about my organization to situate some of the feedback that I want to bring from being part of the first roundtable. So let's talk science. We really focus on STEM-based programming and resources for early childhood to grade 12 youth and educators, accessed in schools and community settings. Now, we focused really very much on using multidisciplinary approaches that includes life, health, physical sciences, technology, engineering, and math, so that kind of traditional STEM piece, but infused with arts and literacy and more. So I was really happy to hear some of the recommendations that came forward from the roundtables. And much of our work also infuses digital literacy. We work with volunteers at 52 universities and colleges. And last year, our programming was accessed in about 1,700 communities. So I was part of the first roundtable or town hall discussion, and you went through fairly quickly some of the key recommendations, but I want to go back for just a second and unpack a little bit around the agreement on two of the big key issues. And the first was the importance of thinking a bit differently about traditional school subjects and how do we allow a shift that can actually happen towards sustainability education. I want to point out, and I hope we can dig into it a little bit more in the Q&A, but it's going to be really challenging to do that because of the complexity of the education systems in Canada, how curriculum is developed. And in fact, right now, there's, I think it's 27 ministries or departments that are responsible for early childhood to post-secondary. It's really important to support educators. So towards the second part of your question, who do we need to support? I think we have to really support educators in building their capacity to foster the skills and characteristics of the youth that we want to be developing. But we have to find more ways to actually engage the youth in program design. So that was one big area that we talked about in the town hall. And then the second is the growing inequities that are happening because of differential technology access. You see kids from privileged environments have easier access to equipment, to training, to the internet, and others don't. So I think we also need to talk more about the impact of poverty as a root cause and look at exploring its impact on sustainable development. I think at the heart of sustainability, though, is shifting the general public. So in our town hall, we were looking at public awareness. So how do we shift the public mindset about consumerism that has really gone unchecked during my lifetime? You know, we fostered a mindset that it's okay to buy stuff and then throw it away. The pandemic shutdown showed us that the earth is resilient and can heal, but at the same time, online shopping exploded, kind of continuing to nurture that material mindset. And on this topic, I don't know if listeners have heard Mark Carney's giving of the 2020 Wraith Lectures, but he was a past governor of the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England, and his lectures were really quite wonderful, and they focused on how we get what we value and why it's so important now that we strive to shift from a market to moral values. So how do we change the current obsession that we have about defining success through financial terms and material terms? So I do hope as we explore the issues a little bit more fully today, it's being clear about what we want to achieve and what personal collective decisions are going to be required to get there. How do we incent people to make the best decisions that will lead to change, and what infrastructure training needs to be in place? So with respect to what we're doing to contribute at Let's Talk Science, it really is very much focused on youth and educators. How do we build the skill sets? How do we build digital literacy? How do we incorporate the Sustainable Development Goals, career information across all of our programming? And what is it about digital technologies as a tool that can really motivate all learners and be inclusive? We found in particular with girls, for example, that if we infuse the use of technology as a tool to solve a bigger challenge, a purpose, and there's a purpose for it, and they'll very quickly learn to program, use big data, deal with the algorithms, and it's all about purpose-driven technology. So we do quite a bit of work there, and I think it's really important that we start young and provide meaningful and relevant. We're currently designing some consultation processes for high school students and trying to understand what they think and what is meaningful to them as we think about sustainable education, and then how can you get kids to be a little bit more action-oriented. And I'm just going to wrap up my comments to say that, I'm really hopeful and I'm really positive, and my organization is doing lots to reach out. But at the same time, I'm really grappling with a few key issues and struggling to sort out how we can contribute to being part of the solution. And the first is, as you mentioned it earlier, the critical importance of reliable and low-cost internet. Like, it's become a human right now, not a privilege, if we really want to leverage everybody's talents. The second is a tendency, I think, to conflate sustainability and climate change. They're connected, they're not the same thing. Figuring out how we tackle eco-anxiety as we help to build the skills and capacities of everyone is, I think, something really important that we have to think about. How do we position education for positive change rather than amplifying a worry? And then the third itself is that digital technology is a drain on the natural resources. So how do we foster a consumer mentality that it changes from it's like it's not okay to keep upgrading your devices every 6 months. So how do we deal with this principle of planned obsolescence that we are confronting? So, I'm moving very, very quickly forward with our programming. I'm super hopeful, but I am wrestling with some bigger issues. With that, I'll stop.
Do you want me to take it from there? Okay. Yeah. So first of all, thanks for the question. I think just to revisit it and kind of work through what I prepared for this conversation. So I run the Pingwa Association. In terms of the question of kind of what particular groups of citizens are we focused on our engagement, our goal as an organization, not unlike Let's Talk Science, is about building digital skills in communities. And our focus specifically is on rural, remote, and Indigenous communities. We're a company that started in Nunavut, is now spread Canada-wide, but that really found where our strength was in working with communities that otherwise are often forgot, especially in tech, especially in even an event like this, and when it comes to solutions. The communities that we work in have just as much to say and are actually living the lived experiences of these pieces, and often aren't heard as much. And so I think so that's the answer to who we are focused are, and what we find is that ultimately any solution, when we kind of get to the question of what do we do to foster citizen engagement in the development of a digital solution towards the reaching of the Sustainable Development Goals. The solutions are in the community, and so this was touched on already, but I think what we often, so we as an organization, we really center on being community led, and what that means is there is no one size fits all approach to the type of work we do. It is different for what each community might need, what each community might bring to the table, and what issues they're looking to solve with technology. Because I think one of the things we have found, and I think as we develop and foster engagement in the development of what is a very needed set of goals presented here, is that it is easy for this just to be yet another policy. It'd be easy for this just to be another very well graphically designed set of goals that the people in the community themselves will never see. And so working directly to connect one-to-one with community members on where where engagement with achieving these goals is directly impacting the community, because people in the communities we work in and in the communities we have offices and staff and live in are already experiencing a need for this to not be solved by 2030. The Sustainable Development Goals, in Canada alone, there's such disparity across whether it's broadband, access to health, access to food, such disparity that in rural communities in particular, and in Indigenous communities especially, again, it's very easy for this just to be looked at as another policy that will never, no one will ever hear anything on again. People are living the need for the solutions immediately, and so trying to get people engaged with helping develop these solutions, that conversation has to be that this is a local solution ultimately. And so to start with that, if we were talking about a digital action plan, which was the core of this question, as we've mentioned, right off the top, it was mentioned we need to level the playing field. It's really telling of my 15 staff in Nunavut today. None of them can watch this presentation. None of them can be involved in this because the internet's not good enough. Our office and our makerspace in Iqaluit is in a community where people can't participate in these types of conversations because the internet isn't strong enough. Yesterday, we lost the internet for 4 hours because it rained. And so when we talk about how to engage people, it's going to require us to go to people and make sure that they don't have to come to us. And then on top of that, in terms of those live solutions as well, and when we're talking about the need for this right now, our makerspace in Iqaluit, our office in Iqaluit, and our staff there are in a community where they can't drink the water right now because it's filled with fuel. And so as we look towards how do the prep, like as we're having these conversations, it's important to realize in this country a lot of people are already living the need for a solution, and they often have those solutions. And people, that the organizations we work with and the way we connect with the communities we work in are the ones that are going to be able to best provide the solutions on how to engage people in rural and remote communities and Indigenous communities across Canada. So I wanted to come with not just whatever that you would call that that I just did, but some solutions and some good news stories. And there's some really nice examples here. And so there's an organization called Smart Ice. They're based out of St. John's, Newfoundland, and they work across Labrador, Nunavik, and Nunavut. And what Smart Ice at the end of the day, they're measuring sea ice levels. This is a big part of the climate approach to the SDGs as well. Is like they are measuring sea ice levels, and they knew if they brought a bunch of scientists to the sea ice and they came and measured it and then flew them back and then did it again next year and so on, you'd get a certain set of data, but not something that's reliable. There's people on that ice every single day. And what Smart Ice solution to get people involved directly in this was to meet people where they already are, to have people join, achieve what Smart Ice is trying to accomplish, which is measuring sea ice daily with what people are already doing across Nunavut, which is going out on the ice daily to find food. And they built a system called Smart Buoys that can attach just to a kamutik, the sled that hunters will often go off with behind their skidoo. And it's just measuring sea ice. And there is an extended version of that where you actually can like participate and take part, planting more permanent buoys that can measure sea ice at a more regular level, but otherwise it's just meeting people where they already are in order to allow a story to be told that's already been told many times in the north. Another example is Siku, which is developed by the Arctic Eider Duck Society out of Sanikiluaq in Nunavut. And Siku is a social media. It's kind of like we call it the Facebook for Inuit. And Siku is a hunting tracking app. It tracks where animals are. It's helping deal with food sustainability by bringing together a community in a tech-based solution that works with GPS. The last example, which is Southern, is there are organizations, especially in the STEAM field, in science, technology, engineering, arts, and math, like Kids Code Jeunesse out of Montreal, that has specifically built sustainable development goals into their content and building awareness out of this. And so, I think all that to say, like, to what Bonnie had said, if we are to support the educators and give them the tools towards this as well, there are organizations like Let's Talk Science, like ourselves, like Kids Code Jeunesse, Canada Learning Code, Actua, that are working in technology and implementing sustainable development goals in the work we're doing. So roundabout, I think I answered all the questions there, but I'll stop there, unless I ramble all day. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I think it's really important for people to be able to see and feel and hear about these solutions and to really have hope, because so much is happening around the world and in Canada that can really put us in situations of despair. And so I'm going to turn to you, Karen, for a hopeful message. And so my question to you, Canada is uniquely positioned at the confluence of two of the world's most transformative trends: digital transformation and environmental change and sustainability. What are the opportunities you see for Canada at this nexus, and how do those relate to the Sustainable Development Goals? And I also follow up. I'd like to also put a comment. You can go ahead, and then I'll follow up on the follow-up question.
Oh, okay, great. So thanks so much for the inspiring opening remarks and the great examples. I'll build off the Smart Ice example, fantastic one, to make a couple comments about this nexus of digital transformation and environmental governance. So Smart Ice is a great example of a generalized trend that's occurring across the world, whereby digital transformation of environmental monitoring is fundamentally changing our ability to get on top of the sustainability challenge. And there are at least two kinds of changes that are occurring that you heard about in that great example. The first change that's occurring is that whereas before we had a scarcity of data, now we have a hyperabundance of data. The second big change is that we had patchy or periodic monitoring. Now we have continuous monitoring, and that's continuous in time and continuous in space. We can monitor in the depths of the Amazon, in the remote reaches of the Arctic, and around the world. Imagine thousands, tens of thousands of apps have been implemented in the past decade or two that are doing exactly what Smart Ice is doing with different communities in different places. So this puts enormous power in the hands of communities, of citizen scientists, not only gathering data, but also in collaborating with scientists and fundamentally changing the way in which we both define and attempt to solve sustainability problems. Now, what do you do with all that data? It's a challenge. And here's where digital transformation comes in. In a world of an abundance, a hyperabundance of data, one of the things tools in our toolkit is artificial intelligence or machine learning. And another very interesting development has been the rise of a new discipline called computational sustainability, where you have computer scientists working on very applied problems to solve sustainability challenges. I'll give you an example. There's a computer scientist named Tanya Berger-Wolf, and she collaborates with another computer scientist named Fei Fang. Fei Fang originally came to the US from China. Tanya came to the US from Israel. Both of them were very inspired to do something computer scientists don't usually do, which is try to tackle sustainability problems rather than, optimize algorithms for Uber, for example. And what they respectively did is apply machine learning to really intractable problems in conservation. In Tanya's case, she invented an app that's a little bit like Facebook for wildlife. Simply on the basis of a photo, her software can identify any animal in the world that has stripes, scars, spots, whatever, and we now have the ability to identify any individual organism in the world, not just a species. And this is transforming the way that the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, the IUCN, actually handles their red list for endangered species. This is going to transform the way in which we are able to document the decline of endangered species and hopefully work more quickly to protect them. Fei Fang used machine learning to create a new app that prevents poaching of endangered species in national parks. And her app is being applied in over 800 parks around the world and has made a measurable difference in actually stopping the killing of endangered species for the illegal wildlife trade. Now, there are many, many examples of innovators out there like Fei Fang or Tanya Berger-Wolf. And so what they're doing is working with these community groups like the Smart Ice app, aggregating that data, providing that data to decision makers, and enabling us to move much more quickly in environmental decision making. And here's my final point. One of the tragedies of 20th century environmental management is we set ourselves goals that we failed to reach. We failed to reach the Millennium Development Goals. We are on track to fail to meet the Sustainable Development Goals, in part because of this lack of data, but also because we often ended up only regulating after the harm was done. After the oil spills and the fish are dead, we find the polluter, right? But the fish are still dead. The hyperabundance of data combined with community monitoring and machine learning, all that digital transformation, now enables us to regulate in real time. We are no longer stuck in only dealing with environmental pollution or hazards. After they happen, we can prevent them, or we can create very powerful incentives to stop pollution in real time. I'll conclude with one more example, which is a very cool Canadian company called GHGSat. They're based in Montreal. They have a satellite network that monitors fugitive methane emissions, and combined with regulatory frameworks that fine emitters in real time, that makes a measurable difference on climate emissions. So these are really powerful tools to tackle the biodiversity, climate, and sustainability challenges that we face. And Canada stands at the confluence of this because we have a very advanced digital transformation agenda, world leaders in AI and quantum, for example. But we also have tremendous responsibility as stewards of a very large landmass with some of the last remaining frontier forests, in the world, we have actually a sort of stewardship responsibility at a global level. And these digital tools can help us get there. That's why I wish that in the future, Canada's Innovation and Skills Plan would actually include a sustainability component. Right now, they're treated separately. In my mind, they actually are essentially one and the same, our sustainability goals and our digital innovation goals. So I'll stop there. And if we have time for the comment, Eliane, great. If not, we can pick it up later.
So I'd just like to dig deeper in terms of a follow-up question, and I think it's important, especially for us today, to think about this in terms of that, Canada hasn't yet fully taken advantage of these opportunities. So what, in your opinion, are the barriers and potential solutions? Funding, incentives, stakeholder partnership. What is it that Canada really needs to do right now?
Great question. Yeah, we haven't fully taken advantage of our unique position globally. The Europeans are moving ahead much faster. The understanding that the environmental sustainability agenda is a digital transformation agenda is embedded in essentially the European Green New Deal. And I won't say more about that, but just to say maybe Canada has some catch up to do in this regard. So some of the barriers are education related. I really appreciated the comments at the start, Bonnie, on education. The way in which we teach digitalization, digital skills doesn't offer students much by way of applications to environmental issues at the moment, but this whole field of computational sustainability, ecological informatics, there are wonderful, wonderful things you can do with computer science to save the planet. We need to be integrating that into the curriculum. A little bit like we should be teaching the physics of electric cars rather than the physics of Carnot cycles and thermodynamics, right? It's a transformation of the curriculum. But also, there are really great leaders we need to support. Yoshua Bengio and a group of, who's of course an AI leader in Canada, and a group of scholars came out recently with a manifesto, a paper around how AI could be used to address climate change issues. And so making sure that we mobilize research and funding resources to put actual momentum behind some of these aspirations of the digital research community in Canada is very, very important. Now, there are barriers to this, though, and the barriers are sort of structural. They have to do with the fact that we don't have the mechanisms in place to often foster these community partnerships. The Smart Ice example is great, but we need many more of those. Proper incentives in research funding and upstream supports for innovators. That would actually require an overhaul, for example, of the whole funding and venture capital landscape in Canada, which has other structural issues that I'm sure you're well aware of. But essentially, we have a sort of a bottleneck in Canada with respect to innovation and commercialization that has in part to do with the lack of capital funding, especially at the Series A stage. So there's fixing the kind of innovation pipeline issue, as well as upstream research support for all of these emerging young researchers who really do want to work at the intersection of sustainability and digital, I think are good places to start. So over to you.
So thank you very much, Karen. I think that gives to think about. So I'd like to now go on to Ken. So Ken, I hope you can hear us. I know we had some difficulty getting you on, and I just want to make sure you can hear me. And so my question to you is, two-eyed seeing has been... Okay, great. So two-eyed seeing has been defined as an approach of inquiry and solutions in which people come together to view the world through Indigenous lens with one eye in terms of perspectives, while the other eye sees through a Western lens. While sharing Indigenous science and knowledge with the Western world to mitigate climate change is important, what protocols do you sense are needed, and what pathways have you been involved in or witnessed that allowed two-eyed seeing to be applied effectively within this process?
Well, there's a lot of interest in Indigenous knowledge. It's actually a part of Canadian legislation as of 2019, but there has been a whole history of research that has taken place assess Indigenous knowledge, but unfortunately, there was not a lot of ethics that was put into the approach. There's a long history of researchers that have come in and talked to community elders, community knowledge keepers, and the benefits went to the researchers, but not back to the Indigenous communities. What we try to do, and what I'm advocating for, is to make sure that community protocols are followed. There is a lot of pitfalls into approaching community elders, because if you don't speak their language, if you don't understand their context, you may not value the information that's being shared out. And another thing that is a bit problematic is this understanding of what Indigenous knowledge actually entails. It's not just information. It's not just like the Western concept of knowledge is that you can master the knowledge and then it becomes your own. When I talk to people about Indigenous knowledge, and what I try to show them is actually a knowledge system. It's a way of knowing, and there's a methodology behind that. So I try to elevate that the methodology so that it's not just specific information. And the other thing that's really, really important is that because it comes from our Indigenous communities, it comes with our value system as well. And it's a different approach and a different way of looking at things. So like, for example, when I talk about fish, when I'm dealing with my federal counterparts and dealing with fisheries, for example, they look at fish as this resource, and they're trying to maximize the economic value of fishing by estimating population sizes, looking at types of efforts and things like that. But when we look at our fisheries, we look at them as relatives. And we try to imagine what it's like for them when they're living in this habitat. So for example, in New Brunswick, we have Willistook, the St. John River. We have Atlantic salmon that are very much endangered. They actually, when they spawn, they make this journey all the way from Norway across the Atlantic Ocean and back to our river system. And once they hit our fresh water, what happens is that they are encountering waters that are not clean because of problems with sewage, problems with agriculture runoff, problems with forestry runoff, problems with transportation, roadway runoff. And so we're not doing our job here of providing a proper habitat for them. And not only that, but we put barriers in the way, physical barriers such as bridges and hydro dams. So if we try to understand things from the perspective of these salmon, these Atlantic salmon, then we can actually have a chance of rebuilding and making a space for them to spawn back. And we're trying to ameliorate or mitigate this problem we have with the lack of biodiversity. And I know that there's a lot of people that will think that, okay, well, we can just move to salmon farming, but it's not really the same thing. You don't have the same nutritional value, and you're actually hurting the spiritual value of what's going on. I also just wanted to quickly mention, like, the things that are going on right now in British Columbia. I have a lot of friends that are in that area from some of the native communities and the non-native communities, and this is a correction of Mother Nature trying to claim back a lake that was drained in the 1920s. And this should be a lesson to us all. This is mitigated by the forest fires. Well, not mitigated, I guess, agitated by the forest fires that happened this past summer, which are part of climate change warning. And all the rain that happened in this area just this past week, they're running down these slopes and washing out all of these highways and threatening these communities because the trees are not there to hold the soil. So, our thinking really has to change fundamentally. Some of the work that we're trying to do here within our nation, I'm part of the Wolastoqey Nation, is we're trying to develop our own science programming and our own monitoring programming. We do want to work in partnerships with federal science, academics, non-government organizations, but we are also going to be engaging our community knowledge holders and our youth so that we can develop our own priorities and look at species that may not necessarily be of interest to others because they lack commercial value, but we know that they have environmental value, because it takes a whole lot of different species to make up this web, so that we can, really start repairing, because we're not saving the planet when we do these environmental mitigations. We're actually saving ourselves. So we're trying to reclaim that role, and I'm hoping that we can develop partnerships in doing that.
Thank you, Ken. This is there's so much to think about in terms of the urgencies and the lessons nature is giving us right now. So I just want to let participants know that we're going to slowly move to the Q&A. So I encourage you in the discussion forum to share any questions you have. There's a live Q&A, so I encourage you to put any of your questions there. And before we go to the Q&A, I would like to share a final bonus question with our amazing panelists. So I would like to ask each of you to identify one or two key drivers that Canada currently urgently needs to address in order to achieve any of the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030 with the help of digital innovations. Are there any specific policies that should be advanced in Canada in order to accelerate the SDGs? So I will let whoever feels called to start.
I'll start. Yeah, first of all, I just want to say thank you to the panelists. Like, I feel so humbled to be here. The work that you're all doing is just totally amazing. And I could go on trying to weave together everything that you're doing. From the public awareness side and some of the work that I've been kind of struggling and working towards, I think access to affordable internet and high-speed internet is so critical. I think Ryan totally nailed it with communities not even being able to participate. And then the other thing that I've been thinking an awful lot about that I think the regulatory environment can help a lot is this mentality about planned obsolescence. The fact that we're using technology, we're distributing technology, but it's almost built to stop working or not talk to each other. So I think if there's ways that policy can come into play in those two areas, that would be great. And I do agree with Karen that Canada is shining when it comes to digital expertise and technical capacity. So we've got potential there. Thanks.
I'd like to follow up and just thank and echo the comments of the panelists. And Eliane, if you're asking us what are one or two most important things that could be done, it's such a challenge, but we have an obligation as well as an opportunity to learn from the land and learn the comments about the misunderstandings of Indigenous knowledge and the importance of a more fulsome understanding are probably for me the top priority. You know, two-eyed seeing doesn't often occur on a level playing field. I work with a collective called the Decolonizing Water Project, and we've developed with Indigenous communities and Indigenous scholars a collaborative mechanism whereby Indigenous guardians and youth build their own water monitoring devices that are digitally enabled and yet very adapted to community needs. Through that project, I remember one person once saying to me, two-eyed seeing doesn't always happen on a level playing field. Remember the power imbalances here. And I really took that to heart in the sense that it's one thing to say that we use one eye to see Indigenous knowledge and another eye to see with Western science. But the fact that, as rightly pointed out, we misperceive Indigenous knowledge is a core issue. And yet, if we could really listen and learn, I think we would transform the way we engage with communities, the way we are mobilizing science, because otherwise there is actually a trap here. And the trap is that we could make the same mistakes we made in the past. Digital transformation could make our sustainability situation a lot worse. It could lead to more e-waste. It certainly could lead to more water pollution. It could lead to an acceleration of resource extraction. The technologies we're talking about can be used to engage in precision hunting, precision fishing, precision mining. Certainly, the global internet is the third largest electricity consumer in the world, and it is on track to become the largest electricity consumer in the world. It is itself one of the major causes of climate change. So unless we radically reform how we engage in digital transformation, we're actually at risk of worsening our situation, making it less sustainable. And that is where I think the very powerful teachings that are being shared with us, that Ken was talking about, can help us develop a very new pathway here that is not the kind of glamorized Silicon Valley tech utopian triumphalist narrative about digital tech. It's a very different narrative about digital tech. So that's my thoughts.
I'll do a quick 2 minutes. Again, thanks to everyone who participated in this, and it's been a pleasure to be involved. I think like my immediate thoughts and the stuff I wrote down has been said already. Just in terms of, I think if I was to pick one thing, it's got to be infrastructure. It's specifically broadband infrastructure. I think like, so what I'll do is I'll go in a slightly different direction and beat a drum of a colleague of mine that it will make him happy, which is, I think like when we look at this, when we look at engagement, when we look at really anything, and especially after the last 2 years, that a guaranteed basic minimum income is maybe a policy piece that I might advocate for under the concept of leveling the playing field all around. So leveling the playing field on broadband infrastructure to ensure participation can happen from those most impacted by not reaching these sustainable development goals. So further to that, a guaranteed basic minimum income, which we got to experience elements of over the pandemic for certain people. And when you look at the sustainable development goals and what you look at how much you can engage with things beyond hunger once you eliminate the concern about hunger, concerned, like, I mean, even just looking at the goals right now, the first 3 would essentially be tackled by a guaranteed minimum income, in that helping to eliminate poverty will help eliminate hunger, and then suddenly engagement is something people have time for. And so, I'll step that back and say, like, at the end of the day, I think like, looking at all those elements and recognizing Canada is gigantic, as no one is surprised. It's also incredibly diverse in terms of what the way people experience Canada, and as much as we can level that playing field to ensure these conversations happen outside of academic settings and in rooms where people otherwise maybe are not able to participate due to lack of broadband, lack of food, lack of housing, all of those things that have to come first. By leveling the playing field, we can allow that much more participation and get that many more solutions. So thanks.
And I guess I should add a couple of comments as well. The thing that I advocate for quite often is I've asked for science investments to go directly into Native communities. I think that it would really be enlightening for a lot of people if they went into Native communities, built these relationships, and then asked the community knowledge holders what they want to see done. Because what tends to happen is the science researcher comes in with questions, brings them to the community, says, can you help me solve this problem? And elders are not going to turn people away. Like they know that we're trying to help everybody. If an Indigenous community is thriving, everybody around that area that is interacting with that community is actually thriving as well. But if you go to an Indigenous community and you ask them, what do you want to see done? What kind of questions do you have? And then reverse that so that the community actually can then find the researchers to work with them. I think that we will have a more diverse problem-solving matrix, and we'll have more holistic approaches. I noticed, and I just want to acknowledge Karen talking about our reliance on the internet. I noticed that there's a lot of movement now towards getting rid of fossil fuels and relying on renewable energy. And there's a lot of our communities are actually getting into that. There's some investments from Canada through Natural Resources Canada into doing some of this work. But the thing that's missing is the fact that when we talk about replacing carbon energy with renewable energy, we don't actually talk about reducing our energy consumption. So I don't think personally that our level of energy consumption is sustainable. And this is coming again from this value system that was been taught to me since I was a young person, that when do we have enough? You know, we can live in abundance without depleting resources if we were smart at it. But somehow we're kind of caught up in this consumerism that we have to keep acquiring more and gathering more, and have several televisions in our house and things like that. Well, this kind of mentality also impacts our approach to any kind of natural resources, whether we're dealing with forestry, mining, fisheries, or any kind of extractive resources like that. And it's counter to our whole sustainable development goals. I'm hopeful that something positive will come out of COP26. But regardless, I know that I can only affect my local community, and I'm hoping that if everybody sort of takes responsibility of their scope of work, of their scope of influence, that this whole patchwork will help reverse the trend. Because like I prefer to live in optimism. I have a lot of friends that are starting to live in pessimism, but there is hope for the future. I truly believe that. It's just that sometimes it takes a crisis for people to realize that we have to change. And I'm hoping that some of these lessons that we are seeing happening in Canada on the West Coast are going to spur us into different kinds of thinking, different kinds of approaches.
Thank you very much. This was really insightful. So we have one question that has come up, and I think it's worth mentioning. I know it's been touched on already, but one of the audience questions we have is, how do you combat the fatigue of trying to tackle these challenges? So I'd like all of you to answer.
I think sorry, I don't know if we have a hand to raise, but anyway, just really quick. For me, to get back to one of the main things, like for me, because I've felt that fatigue many times, and the thing that always works for me is, I think this has been said a million times, but it's genuinely true, of just try as much as possible to think locally, to find even just one piece. Like, no one person, one organization is going to solve all of these calls to action, or even one of them by themselves. And so as much as you can find the, whatever it is in your community that the community needs, that the community can lead and take ownership of, that's been the solution that has worked for us, and is why I'm here and not burnt out right now.
I will mention something. I always have to, I guess, sort of take time for myself. We really have to. We cannot. I think we're humanly impossible. It's humanly impossible for us to try to solve all the issues all the time, because whether we suffer from burnout or some other kind of stress-related illness, and we should always, when we work on ourselves and our own inner peace, that will reflect in the work that we put outward. Some people have more energy to put outward, some people have more responsibilities, but doing those simple things, such as spending time outside, so you're actually can actually feel and touch the weather, so you feel you're part of nature. I do that daily. I make it a point of doing that. Getting up and closing your computer or your phone and not taking messages, and just actually being a human being, that's really important. When we work on ourselves, that gives us strength and that renews our spirit, and that's the kind of thing that's really important. I know that if you start thinking about all of the world's problems and all of the sustainable development goals, that it can be daunting. And that's where I think where people start checking out and start saying, well, I can't fix it, so I might as well not even try. But I think that it's this reciprocal thing. Like, what we do in a micro sense will reflect what we do in a macro sense. But within the areas of influence, and this is another thing that my dad actually told me, the Creator put me in a position, in a place for a reason, and don't question it too much. But when you have a responsibility and the ability to actually vocalize something positive, take advantage of that opportunity. So, hence here we are in this conference. I'm trying to share some of the information that I've been taught, and I'm hoping that people are able to develop their own positive outlooks and take care of themselves, so that we can, in general, have a healthier ecosystem here in Turtle Island.
I'll jump in here. I couldn't underscore more what Ken said. It is so important for self-care. But what gives me hope and keeps me moving after like 30 years in this space is actually the youth. When we have opportunities to bring them together and make the conditions right for them to feel empowered and able to contribute, the creativity, the passion, the excitement and the desire and drive is so palpable that every time I get together with them, I get inspired, and that really keeps me going.
It's nice to hear you say that, Bonnie, because I teach a class of 200 students every year at the University of British Columbia on environment and sustainability issues. And at that age, a lot of young people are struggling with ecological anxiety and climate grief. So we have this kind of strange situation in our society. Some people are deeply anxious and grieving. Others are simply in denial. And then still others sort of dissociate and go shopping, right? Rather than doing anything about the problem. And that's it's a very peculiar time for people to be in who are working on these issues. So for those of you who are feeling ecological anxiety or climate grief, I think these suggestions, the importance of community, the kind of the amazing regenerative abilities of even a short amount of time in contact with nature without digital devices, the importance of self-care are all good. But I just want to add one more thing, which is, a quote that inspires me is one from Antonio Gramsci, which he wrote while he was in prison under the fascist regime in Europe a long time ago, which he said, pessimism of the intellect. We are in a terrible situation, but optimism of the will, that is, and playfulness of the imagination is something I would add to that. Like no one is denying the situation is actually quite critical, but it is, all of these things still require us to really step up in a crucial time of need, and digging deep for that optimism, however you need to support yourself to get there, is kind of our generational responsibility. So I feel that very strongly, that sense of responsibility. And if self-care helps you get there, that's great. But let's not shirk that responsibility.
Beautiful. Thank you all. This has been just so amazing on so many levels, because what you all really make us realize is that there's a lot of work we can do collectively, but there's also inner work we need to do in terms of sustain the long journey ahead and allow what is needed to move forward. And so I really would just like to thank all of you for everything you've given and shared. And it's really been a lot of invaluable insights. So I would really like to just invite each of you, the panelists, to take maybe a minute, maybe 30 seconds to highlight something in terms of key thoughts for policy recommendations that you see that are critical actions for Canada to accelerate a sustainable future with the help of digital innovation. Just last thought.
I'll start with saying I think we've articulated, I have a lot of the policies, but I would like an approach. So thinking about the idea that not only do we drive down the technical side of things, but we talk to the public, and we really are thinking about communication and engagement and making sure that we're sharing the same kind of values. And I think sometimes it's one or the other, and we really need an integrated approach as we go forward for sustainability.
Well, for myself,
go ahead, Ken.
Okay, for myself, I would like to see like Canadian policy like prioritize environmental sustainability and biodiversity in their investments over economic prosperity. The opposite is true. like we always try to master and try to fully understand our resources so we can maximize our economic gain, because there's this fear that we're going to fall behind. I don't know who we're going to be falling behind, but I know that if we invest in environmental services and recognize that, invest in biodiversity, that there will be long-term economic viability. So I would love to see that as our priority.
Great points. I'll just build on that if I may. Research, CIHR, NSERC, SSHRC, so the Tri-Council plus the NRC research budget combined. What is the collective policy that would channel research into the intersection of digital tech and environmental sustainability? We don't have that. We have actually an equivalent for EDI issues, which is an adaptation of the Athena Swan project from the UK, where Canada has now become a world leader in infusing equity, diversity, and inclusion issues into the research funding that they do, both the research funding to industry as well as to academia. We need to do that on this front. We need to do that on the sustainability front. And I believe, Ken, an outcome of this would be and should be suggested directing a lot more research, science research directly into communities and led by communities. I think that would really be a big leap forward. Another key policy recommendation is that our innovation and skills plan right now is pretty silent on sustainability issues, except for climate change. Although, as Bonnie pointed out, sustainability is a lot more than climate. These are not separate agendas. Our innovation and skills plan needs an overhaul. It needs to incorporate our SDG commitments. Ken is right. In some cases, that would mean that we are prioritizing investment in environmental services over short-term economic development. But I also believe that long-term biodigital innovation is actually the future of the world's economy. That is, again, the path Europe is taking. Not only net zero, circular economy, Canada will be left behind economically if we don't wrap our heads around that environmental protection is the cornerstone of a profitable economy in the 21st century. That's why we need to infuse these sustainable development goals into our innovation and skills plan.
I'll just conclude not by adding much. I feel like everyone did a great job of covering everything there, and some really great ideas. And I've mentioned a few ideas already. I think I'll just end with kind of at the end of the day, anything that can level the playing field to involve people that are ultimately affected by these policy pieces, and hosting events like this when we can start to go back in person in communities outside of major city centers to see, to get to experience, if we were hosting this right now in Iqaluit and no one could drink the water, I think then we would probably be prioritizing the water as the water piece of this puzzle. So the more we can live these experiences and ultimately hear from the communities most impacted by them, that'd be where I'd end.
Thank you all. I really, so we come to the end for our panel discussion. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us today for this important event. I thank all the panelists for offering your wisdom and insights. A commentary on the national dialogues will follow immediately, so I encourage you to stay. And if any of the panelists, if you'd like to stay for the commentary, please know you're welcome. Lastly, I would like to let everyone know that a report for the National Dialogue Police Project will be produced and ready to be circulated in the spring of 2022. So I would like to welcome everybody to the commentary part of this section. And we're really lucky today to have two government officials for this session. We have Dr. Joël Martin, who is the Chief Digital Research Officer of the National Research Council of Canada, NRC, and he oversees the Digital Technology Center, where he has served in multiple leadership roles. His strategic leadership has resulted in an increase in the impact of digital technology research at the NRC and beyond, including advances in application in data science and analytics, AI, cybersecurity, and natural language processing. His work also has contributed to increasing scientific output and impact of NRC's Digital Technologies Research Center to Canada and Canadians. We'll also have Olivier Bouillon, who is the Director of Sustainable Development Goals Unit at Employment and Social Development Canada. He joined ESDC in 2019 to lead the SDG unit, which leads the overall coordination of Canada's 2030 agenda and its 17 SDGs. It is notably mandated to develop a national strategy, a federal implementation plan, both released this year, to monitor and report on activities related to the 2030 agenda, raise public awareness of and support for the 2030 agenda, foster new partnerships and networks to advance the SDGs, and develop and administer the SDG funding program. So Olivier is also a policy expert and economist who strongly believes that the SDGs help build a better world. So welcome to the both of you for sharing your time with us today. We will start with Joël. Thank you.
Thank you, Eliane. I thought that was a wonderful panel. It was a great 1 hour introduction to many of the topics. During the panel, I heard several messages, and many of those messages point to the fact that we're working in an interacting network. And somehow we have to patch together solutions. So we're each working on our own patch, as Ken said, and we have to somehow stitch them together. And I think it's an important point across all of the panelists that isolated scientific facts are not useful by themselves. We have to somehow integrate them into our lives. We find that ourselves all the time when we find some new medical thing about how we're supposed to eat, we can't integrate it into our lives. Also, isolated technologies are not going to be useful by themselves. They have to somehow get integrated to solve this. Similarly, we're not just talking about one goal. Isolated goals, a single goal at a time is not good. We can't just maximize short-term economic development. There are lots of SDGs. There are lots of things that we need to be working on all at the same time. And so some of the themes, I'll try to repeat some of the more detailed things that I heard, is that one important part of this patchwork quilt is to encourage and incent people to live the SDGs. So Bonnie was telling us that it's important to have a different think differently about school subjects. And that's true at the Let's Talk Science and the Kids Co-Jeunesse. A big important point that got raised many times was we need to ensure that there's equitable access to information, but also to the digital tools. We don't want our internet parade to be rained on, as it was recently in Khalid. Another part of this, encouraging people, is to give them the purpose. So the technology can be a tool. This is part of the quilt. Somebody's going to come up with the technology. Somebody's going to invent the sensors. Somebody's going to collect the data. Everybody's playing their part, but everybody is serving the larger purpose, and knowing that purpose can encourage more people to participate. And it's not just about policy in getting people engaged in these SDGs. If you go to the communities, we're going to hear, we already heard that some of the problems need solutions well before 2030. The fuel needs to get out of the water in Ekali now, and connectivity is needed now, and water, the food is scarce in some places, and we need the solutions as quickly as possible. And as we heard, we don't want to set goals that we fail to meet. We don't want to continue to set goals that we fail to meet. So the digital transformation is at a stage now where maybe this is possible. We've got continuous environmental monitoring. We heard maybe 4 examples: smart ice, the GHG sat. We heard also from Ken. I think also Google deforestation, satellite images for deforestation. Those are all examples of the environmental monitoring. There might be thousands of these apps from what we heard from Karen. And we have the AI and computer scientists looking at computational sustainability to start addressing this. So maybe this is the time to actually achieve our goals. And part of the whole quilt is going to be the indigenous knowledge, taking into account the elders, the culture, the language, the value systems, because it's all part of a system. And we can't just focus on one piece of science, one piece of technology, or one goal at one time. And I think, so I'm just going to use that to end that we need policy, of course, and that's going to define our playing field. We're going to need pieces of the solution. But one thing that we need to do, we can't stop with the policy. We can't stop with the pieces. We need to glue it together. And I think Pingwalak is actually living that in the north, trying to glue it together. For this internet connectivity, for example, we need the connectivity, but we need to have the language. So we need people to be able to work in their language. We need a robust technology so that if it rains, there's a failover, so that if I don't know, if the satellites pick it up, or there are drones that pick up and fix the connectivity when there are problems. And one of the advantages, just to feed off of what Karen was saying, is that AI actually gives us a really powerful tool to help balance lots of data from lots of sensors, so that we're not just paying attention to one piece of information, and to balance against multiple priorities. We as humans might take the easy solution and say, okay, I'm just going to optimize my bottom line, the dollars. But we can have AI tools help us do optimization across multiple objectives, so that we can be managing all of the pieces at once, and make sure that we come up with a solution that addresses all of them and not just optimizing one of the goals, so that we do have this opportunity to stitch together all of the patches that we have. And I think if I had to say what the policy is that I would encourage, I think Karen's indication of a direction of funding towards so the tri-councils and NRC towards the stitching together of solutions, that's the one I would underscore. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Olivier. As Eliane mentioned, I'm the director of the Sustainable Development Goals Unit at the SDC. We're actually the department and the unit who's been mandated to develop a national strategy for Canada. And we've also developed a federal implementation plan, which is the federal contribution. I'd like to thank you for the invitation. It was a great session to listen to. Lots of great insights, lots of great information. I've taken a lot of notes. But in my remarks or my comments, I will kind of echo what Joel said. What's very important about the SDGs to some extent, what is very critical, is that it's offering us a common language. As Joel said, we should not look at the 17 SDGs in silos. They are part of an ecosystem. And they give us that common language so that we can benchmark our actions or results against the same sets of indicators or priorities. And it's also offers this ability to do trade-off, because nothing comes for free. And I think this is one of the greatest benefits of the SDG framework, is that it's not we live in la-la land and we have to improve all the 70s as if it's easy. We know nothing comes for free. We can improve the economy, but there might be an environmental cost. We might want to improve the environment, but it might have an economic cost. But what has maybe not been mentioned enough for me in the discussion is that a lot of, and I think it was mentioned a little bit, but we talk a lot about the environment. And when we look at the three pillars of sustainability, economic, social, and environmental, a lot of progress has been made on the environmental side, but maybe not so much on the social side. I'm going to talk a little bit about each of the sections that taken place, but when we look at education, for example, it is as critical to teach our kids in schools about the value of the environment as it is important for them to understand what is diversity, what is inclusion, what is respect. We are not only going to leave an earth to our kids, we're also going to leave a society, a model, and they're going to have to live with it. And I think this is one of the key elements that is very central to the SDGs, is try to balance those priorities. When Ken was talking about some of the challenges, when another panelist was talking about what was going on in Iqaluit, it's, of course, we would like to have access to the internet. We would like to have clean water. But again, what are the key priorities? So when we look at education, there's a lot of great tools in place. There's lots of great initiatives that are currently existing in school, for example, where kids have to decide what action they want to take. on the 17 SDGs, what goals they want to achieve, and then to identify benchmarks, results, targets. And then they realize that, oh, to improve something, maybe there is a cost somewhere else. And it increases their awareness that, again, nothing comes for free. And if you want a healthy society, a healthy planet, maybe there is an economic cost. And they will understand that, you know, shopping is not maybe the answer. And so that's what I wanted to first mention, is that it's a great tool for us to expand our way of looking at things, and not just through a single lens. So it's a great thing. There was discussion on engagement. I think I was mentioned one of the key, again, it's how we can work together to advance local goals, global goals, but also local goals. And at the end of the day, what we're trying to achieve is the well-being of our communities, and what's important in BC might not be what's important in St. John, or in Iqaluit, or in Toronto. And so again, the SDG gives us that ability to tailor what are the key priorities for the communities. And a lot of municipalities, some university at the local level are allying forces in what is called the localization, is the SDGs, to try to identify what their priorities should be. And that is great, because on top of that, it identifies sets of indicators so that they can tell their stories and what they are trying to achieve, so others can actually learn from that, or align their priorities, or see, oh, there are benefits of doing something the same way or not. But it's also gives us that ecosystem that we all live in different realities, and some priorities might not be exactly the same. So looking at the SDG as an aggregate might be looking at it the wrong way, when at the end the impact is at the local level. Of course, the environment is obvious, but also social. So it's very important in this situation to participate in the dialogue, to ally forces, and to have that cross-sectional approach, because we all look at things from different lenses. I wanted to flag that we've developed the Canadian Indicator Framework, for example. That is the set of the 17 SDGs, Canadians' ambitions, some targets, lots of indicators. There's about 150 indicators with the Global Indicator Framework from the UN and the Canadian Indicator Framework. That gives some broad directions. But at the federal level, we don't have the levers on all of the 17 SDGs when it comes to education, to health, sustainable cities. This is administered by different level of authorities. And this is where everybody has to come up with their own, in a way, priorities, their own indicators, and contribute, so that we can have that mega data and actually better understand where we are. In terms of funding, I could not agree more with what Joel said. We live in a world where it's financial bottom line. This is the challenge. How do we monetize externalities, social externalities, environmental externalities? For a company that you save a couple of trees, it's a cost. It's not a common benefit. So all the public goods, how do we take them into account? And I think this is where a lot of work is being done within the federal government as well, on how to internalize those costs, and not just look at the dollar amount, but also at social implications in terms of diversity, in terms of inclusion, in terms of promotion of a healthy society. And so those are the ways that we are able to actually deliver on programs, not just based on their cost and their bottom line, and kind of going out of that financial bottom line mentality to be able to be more inclusive. I'm going to go very quick for the last, or indigenous issues. It is, of course, critical. We've been working a lot with the SDG unit, with the National Indigenous Organization and a lot of indigenous groups, because what was said by Ken could not be any truer. We have to learn from each other. There are lessons to be learned from all corners of society, but especially from the indigenous peoples in Canada. We are supporting, for example, project in Nova Scotia on sustainable farming. So I really appreciated all the discussion that was on that, because that's exactly what it is. We all see things from different lenses, and we might think from a Western perspective that, oh, we understood it all. We know exactly how things work, and we are discarding a lot of ancestral knowledge gathered among generations and generations to maintain a healthy society. And this is one of our goals for us. It's to echo that traditional knowledge, to be able. But when it comes to identification of priorities, it's also equally important for indigenous peoples to identify themselves their priorities, because we don't look at priorities the same way. For some of the priorities, for us, it's a challenge. For them, it's obvious. So we all come from different backgrounds in that sense, and we're working closely with Indigenous organizations to support their identification of their priorities, identify indicators that can actually document their realities, so that we can have them contribute fully to the achievement of the SDGs. So I'll stop there, but thank you so much for the invitation again.
Thank you both. So I have one question that I received, and it's the idea that we're at a time where everybody in Canada knows about COVID-19. And so there's been a lot of campaigning to explain what it is, encourage people to get vaccinated, encourage people to have social distancing and cleanliness measures to mitigate in terms of COVID spread. However, we are still in a situation where there's still a lot of people in Canada who don't know about the Sustainable Development Goals. What do you recommend in terms of what are ways we could increase that awareness of the Sustainable Development Goals and the concept of sustainability in general in ways that every single person in Canada would be aware of them?
I can start. I mean, part of our job is to raise awareness. So we have tools, we have websites, we have information to share. But most importantly, I think there's a lot of organizations in Canada that are doing a fantastic job promoting and engaging us the SDGs. I think it's today, if people want to get involved to answer the call for action, it's possible to finalize at the municipal level through some organizations. There's Universities Canada if you're in academic, there's College and Institutes Canada if you're in a college. There is NGOs that are gathered around Alliance 2030 with more than 2,500 NGOs. There is the Global Compact Network that is more targeted to businesses. So there's a lot of resources that are available today. It's just to embrace them and take the step to actually internalize the 17 SDGs into daily work. Everybody can do it. It's up to us at the end of the day to change.
So I think that the tricky part, you can give everybody the list and make it available somewhere for everybody to get to. But the problem is this internalizing, as Olivier was just mentioning. How do you make it make sense or matter to each of the individuals? So there has been a lot of I don't know, initiatives for different types of climate change, where a particular example matters. Now, can we do that for some of the others where we have a site that maybe I'm imagining things for kids, but so you could have something about the water system. So how do we keep our water clean, and how does that compare between a major city and some other location? And then you can bring in several of the points of several of the SDGs and interrelate them and make them make sense. Because a list by itself is not enough. Something has to be added on top of it, like a little exercise or an illustration about a problem that's going on. Be attaching it to news, so some news article goes up about something that's gone wrong or that needs to be immediately addressed, and then you encourage all of the reporters to put a little blurb on a sidebar for each of these news articles that gives access to the background information about the SDGs that are related to that news story. Something to make it concrete, to make it matter. That would be my suggestion. Or class of suggestions. I'm not being super specific, but.
Thank you. I think this idea of how do we embed it is such a critical one. And so we have about 6 minutes to go, and I just wanted to ask both of you if you could identify one or two key drivers that Canada currently urgently needs to address in order to achieve any of the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030 with the help of digital innovations? And are there any specific policies that should be advanced in Canada in order to accelerate the SDGs?
I don't know that I would go beyond anything that we heard, the list that we've already heard from the panelists and what Olivier has mentioned. So I think it's important to direct funding. And so one example of that is research funding. Can we figure out a system that helps direct research funding towards these goals and solving the goals simultaneously? Because we already have lots of examples of the pieces are being developed. How do we stitch them together? That is important. Related to funding is funding for from venture capitalists for small companies that would then go out and do this on a larger scale. So the research funding would help with first prototypes, but maybe we need to have more of the companies. Then I think that another important goal would be I'm bouncing between several of them. We heard many. We heard that there are aspects of food, housing, water that needs to be dealt with right now. We heard about the potential for negative use of digital tools, and we'll need to ensure that there's a policy to avoid those. We need to ensure that we bring in the indigenous knowledge and ensure that there isn't a power imbalance. So there are a few of these aspects that of solving the problem and gluing together or stitching together the quilt that require some regulation, some policy, some guidance. And the one that I'm advocating for is the funding one. Maybe I'll hand it over to Olivier now.
No, I completely agree with what you just said, Joel. For me, it's the integration of policy. I mean, we all have different priorities, but there is truly a challenge at times with the way we're organized, where we are really looking at things through silos, through specific lenses. And when you are, for example, the minister for one issue, you are a minister for one issue and not for all of the issues. So of course, there's something called cabinet, and people have to foster progress on all of the files. But at the end of the day, everybody feels accountable for one thing, and often one thing only. And so one of the key elements for me is to bring all those pieces together. There are a number of initiatives at the federal level, the quality of life that was mentioned in the budget. There's the Sustainable Development Goals and 2030 Agenda. There's also the Federal Sustainable Development Strategy that is more about greening the government. All of them are coming together, but it will take some time before they fully align and can be integrated into the same umbrella. But that's only one step, because then, as I mentioned earlier, we all have different authorities, and this is not going to solve what's happening in Calgary entirely. It's going to take different actions. It's not going to address education challenges in some provinces. It's done again at the provincial level. It's not going to address health crisis issues in some provinces as well. So it's how then we move from one supra layer to more a local level and be able to align priorities. So that's the first, for me, element. It's how do we can bring together all those various priorities. The second is, as Joel was mentioning, is on the financial front. It's how can we account for all the externalities and get out of that financial bottom line, because otherwise we're going to a wall. We're unable to monitorize the environment. We're unable to monitorize even more social benefits. There is zero incentive at times. It's just punishment if you don't respect some diversity priorities, but there is no incentives and people fail to understand the benefits. More research needs to quantify that so that people can better integrate and see that it's not just a good thing to be diverse. It's actually highly positive for society, and that's how we progress, and it's how we make things better for everybody. So the agenda is based on leave no one behind. That's a critical element. How do we make sure that in what we do, we leave no one behind? And it takes by integrating all those elements that are today not taken into account. It doesn't matter if you sell widgets, if you have a diverse workforce, if you contribute fully to a sustainable and healthy society. that's not the point. And that's a bit of the problem, is that we're all looking at those things through our little silos, taking into account the bottom line, what's left in our pocket, and sometimes completely miss the boat and not realizing it contributing to the problem as opposed to the solution. So I think for me, that's one of the key elements.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Joël, Martin, Olivier Boulier. This has been a really amazing session. It was really important for us to finish with a commentary from people who are thinking about policy, and this was critical in terms of your time with us. We'd like to thank you for taking the time to comment on this session that we just had, and thank you for all your ideas and the wisdom shared. We look forward to integrating everything we've learned from both of you into our final report that will be shared in the spring. And I'd like to us today. So thank you. Merci. Bonne journée à tout le monde. Bye.
Merci.
Merci.
Merci. Au revoir.